And welcome in to the Fun Astrology Podcast. We are already to Thursday, May 28th. Thomas Miller checking back in. And I had a little bit of unfinished business from our trilogy of the last 3 days that I thought I would just bring to light. And it was another one of those punctuation marks, another exclamation mark on that whole theme of what we were talking about, especially with, gosh, this fits together so cool. So Neptune is sitting right now at 20 degrees in Pisces. You've got to listen to the last 3 days of episodes to be current in this conversation, but I just had one other little lingering point. That 20 degrees, so it begins its third decan. Now that's going to get interrupted by a retrograde this summer. But when it turns back and then starts to move forward again, it will be in that third decan of Pisces. And with that, I think this amped up or amplified spirituality in a whole new way, this new consciousness. Okay, couple of things. Like my author, Fred Dodson, that I've done all 28 audiobooks for. He writes a book about the Pleiadians. And not only the Pleiadians, about him having his second personal encounter with the Pleiadians. And you'd have to get that book too. I'm not going to go there now. But it was about an encounter where they literally came for his DNA. And that's been happening. Those stories have been out there so much. The whole alien theme has been showing up in Majana's readings a lot. Again, past 6 months. So this spiritual connection with that which is beyond our own world is a part of this theme as well. And I would expect that to amplify, basically, bottom line, as Neptune really firmly gets entrenched in that third decan, and especially with all this work going on, and that it's working cooperatively. So just another cool little aside that I didn't get thrown in there. Okay, let's talk about today, because we do have Mercury moving into Cancer. It takes place at 2:04 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, Mercury is not in detriment in ancient astrology in Cancer. Mercury is in detriment actually in Pisces. But it is moving from its home sign to the next sign. And I've always said, I think with the exception of Saturn in Capricorn moving into Aquarius, which it rules both, ancient ruler of Aquarius, with that exception, when a planet changes from its home sign, it gets grumpy. Astrology is laid out in a systematic, beautiful fashion that the next sign basically doesn't have the same characteristics as the previous sign. So Mercury being about communication and about being scatterbrained a little bit, and the Geminian characteristic of the twin, and it's about the intellect, and it's about the mind, and it's about learning, and it's about chatter. It's your monkey mind. When your monkey mind takes over, that's Mercury. And now it's in Cancer. Water, deep water, emotion, soul, stillness, quiet, intuition, nothing that Mercury can relate to. So that airy little butterfly is going to have to blow some bubbles for the next little while, and it's going to be a little while, because on June 18th, Mercury goes retrograde in Cancer, and it doesn't get out until, well, the retrograde ends July 12th. But Mercury won't retrace all those steps fully and transition then ingress into Leo until early August. And not to compound things, but during that time, it's going to be in a sign-based square, at least, with Mars in Aries. And by the end of Mercury's retrograde in Cancer, Mars in Aries is going to be slowing down to station retrograde, which it does almost at the very end of its transit through Aries. It slams on the brakes, turns around, goes back retrograde, and then doesn't leave Aries until the end of the year. So basically, we've got a lot of tension coming up between the signs Cancer and Aries, particularly played out through Mars and Mercury. Now, I mentioned this yesterday, and we cannot go without mentioning it in context of what's coming up. And that is the Moon Wobble begins on May 29th. What is the Moon Wobble? We've talked about it a few times here. It certainly was in effect during the early days of COVID, don't you know? It's a concept that when the sun intersects either by conjunction, so being right on the axis, or at a square 90 degree to the axis of the nodes of the moon. This time it happens to be a conjunction in Gemini. It's right at 29 degrees, too, so it's almost as the sun is on its way out. But on June 19th, 6:31 in the evening, exactly, if you want to make note of that, the sun will conjunct the north node. The Moon Wobble phase takes place 3 weeks prior to and 1 week after that exact conjunction. Happens 3 times a year. And according to Moon Wobble theorists, or conspiracy theorists, you might say, just crazy stuff happens during moon wobbles. And yeah, you can trace all the crazy stuff back, including COVID and 9/11 and all the, you want to look back. It's all there, so we will have that coming up. Sometimes it's in conjunction or in parallel to a Mercury retrograde. Sometimes it is not. This time it happens to be. So just say we've got some interesting stuff ahead of us. A little bit of that is Mars erratic motion, so it takes a while to get through Pisces. It's June 28th when it will ingress into Aries. So we have Mercury doing its thing in Cancer without that square. But then after the end of June, there toward the 1st of July, that's an interesting period right in through there. So that kind of begins that extra tension. So I would say, the pressure's off in June more so than it picks up toward the end of the month, and then things get more interesting. But, around communication, it's just going to be different. It's going to be more watery. It's not going to be as fun, let's just say. Could there be some tense conversations coming up in June? That's likely. Have a good one. We will see you for TGI Friday tomorrow.